That's right, folks. Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, Bobby LaMarco. Join today, by the way, when you look at me, you're like, oh man, we're talking some redraft. No. I've crossed over to the dark side, mostly because of the great content that Razzball is putting out in the Dynasty by this man, Richard Sickels. Go follow him at Richard Sickels on Twitter. What's going on, Richard?
Not much. I'm just happy to be here, man. Excited to talk some football. It's going to be a good one, I think.
Oh, yeah. And the reason why it's going to be a good one, folks, is that we have compiled myself. I don't know what's a good movie analogy for this, but I basically sent Richard out on a journey. I said, Richard, I need a Dynasty Trade Chart just for my own personal life. I needed one, but I was like, we're going to put it on the site. And I sent Richard on a journey months ago. And Richard went through he went to different countries. He went around the world talking to different cultures about Dynasty Trade Charts. And he put together a premier Dynasty Trade Chart on Razzball.com with over 500 picks and players, folks, grading from 1 value to 100. I honestly can tell you this. It is a fantastic tool. Everything you need to figure out your dynasty trades. If you're a win now team, if you're a rebuilding team, it is a fantastic tool. So go check it out on Razzball.com. We're going to break down a little bit how to navigate over to that Dynasty Trade Chart, how to use it. And then we're going to break down some trades today, folks, based on some of the latest news and notes in the NFL scene. Now, Richard, before we get started, kind of talk to us a little bit about the process, how you feel about the chart, what went into it, kind of give us some background about where you got to your projections, numbers, and stuff like that.
Sure. So, first off, this is my baby, like you were saying. I'm loving it. I really am. It took a little while for me to figure out where we were going with it, but once we finally got things going, I've just been excited about it. It was a month or so of me just literally every day. This was all I was doing, was going through and changing values and seeing where I would have guys and changing how I had had the rankings set. And then once I had it figured out where I felt comfortable with it, then I started reaching out to other people to see what they would think about it. And we kind of, it was a nice collaboration of what's the word I'm looking for? My senseis out there, my the people out there that showed me some of the ropes, and I came away with being really happy with this trade chart and the way it is. I've used it several times myself already. I actually just made a trade earlier today using the trade chart. Nice. It came out pretty well. Honestly.
So let's get into it. And I think the first off, I want people to know, Richard will be breaking down bi-weekly articles, kind of everything that's current. We have coaching changes that went into the last few weeks. We're going to have free agency news and notes over the next few weeks, then the NFL draft. So Richard is going to be providing his insights based on the latest news and notes. So go check out Richard's articles on Razzball.com. But we also want to show you where you can find the chart itself, easy and accessible outside of his article. So jumping over to Razzball.com. So if you go to football.razzball.com, it takes you right to the NFL page. And we actually created a 2024 Dynasty tab because at this point, I'm all in. Honestly, I've crossed over. I don't know if that makes you, if I'm Darth Vader and you're Senator Palpatine or something, I don't know what this makes us now. But whatever, we're all on the dark side now of the Dynasty.
You're in this one, you'd be Palpatine. You're the Emperor.
Okay. Oh, yeah. All right.
You're driving the show. The show. Yeah.
Yes, I like that. Oh man, I'm shooting lightning out of my hands. I'm stoked. I love it. That's the way to get the juices flowing first thing in the morning. But if you go over to Razzball.com, click on the NFL tab, you get to the football side. You go to this Dynasty tab. We also have Nate's top 200, by the way, which is really cool. Nate is really putting some time to put in his top 200, and we will have consensus rookie rankings after the NFL draft. Sorry, Richard, I haven't told you that yet. You're learning live on air with everybody else that me, you, and a couple other writers are going to put together some consensus rankings. So saddle up, folks. We're going to have some fun this offseason. But you go to the Dynasty Trade Chart, and it takes you to the landing page. Now, of course, like I said before, you could always just follow Richard's account, search it, and whenever you post an article, you can go check it out too. It'll be in there. But this is the Dynasty Trade Chart. And how we recommend people use it is you can use this top search bar, and the search bar will allow you to search players, picks, positions, and then values. So right off the bat for me, like how I use this chart today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the guys that I really like. One of them is Brian Robinson. I love Cliff Kingsbury, what he can bring to that offense. We saw him kind of lean towards using a work Kenyon Drake early on in the tenure, and then it went to James Conner as soon as 2022. So I love the fact that he's willing to use a bell cow runner. I think Brian Robinson will take advantage of that. So what I would do is I would go into this chart, type in Robinson, and then I would find Brian Robinson's value. So that's where it is. So right now, Richard has him at 26. So what does that even mean? Well, the best part too is after that, I would go over, I would type into the consensus chart where they're at 26 and find kind of some players and or picks what would pop up, right? So obviously it depends entirely if you're a win now team, stuff like that. So I think this is really important, win now versus a rebuilding team, what you're kind of looking for. I do want to preface this whole conversation with it's still early in the off season. Like we still have a lot to unpack here. There's going to be free agency. There's going to be the NFL draft. I don't really think you should spend too much draft capital or get too aggressive of dynasty trades just yet. If you could get a value for a player, you always go get it. I'm not saying you don't, but just be wary of that because, well, especially when we're talking about coaching changes, like they could hate Brian Robinson. I could be so wrong about this. Like they could go into the offseason and be like, I don't want this guy as my RB1. And then Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury drafts a guy in the second round. And then this trade makes no sense. So I want to, make sure that I ease in with caution, but use this just something because of those moves. So now then you just basically go down and navigate the chart so you get to that 26 area, and then you'll start seeing picks. That's where Richard has your 2024, 2025, and 2026 picks. So which is really a thing great about Richard's chart is that like we look out 3 years. So you could trade future picks and try to figure out value there as well. So based on this, you could kind of even look at you're probably a win now team. Richard's basically saying you could technically trade a future first, and that's probably equal value for Brian Robinson. So now, Richard, your kind of thoughts about how I navigated this, is this kind of like what your thought process was too, about how you used the chart as well? You talked a little bit about some of the trades you made. So how has your process been so far with the Dynasty Trade Chart?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I do. Is typically what I do is I look for whoever it is that I'm trying to trade for, and then I'll find what their value is, just like what you did, where you found out that Brian Robinson was 26, and then I go down to that area and I find somebody in that range that I have that I think would be a good key piece or a pick that I have, or sometimes I'll go a little bit lower and I'll find package deals where I can package in a pick along with a player that maybe the value would add up. So like a 2-for-1 type of deal.
Okay, let's talk about it. So we're already in Brian Robinson mode here.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks, for the number. It's number 4. I skipped ahead. I should have used Chris Godwin. A good host would have been like, I already know I had Chris Godwin as my first player to talk about. But you know what? Whatever. It's early. It's Saturday morning, folks. It's the weekend. We're out here just having fun. All right. So Brian Robinson, what's the trade package you kind of put together? I'm going to probably assume most of the teams trying to acquire a running back are win now mode teams. So like this kind of makes sense. Like based on what I'm seeing right here, a 2025 first, like if you just won the championship and you need to retool your running back room, Brian Robinson for not this year's first, but 2 years down the road. If you're a dynasty team that's bottom 3, bottom 4, knowing you're not going to probably win this year, that 2025 first is extremely valuable to you, especially because you want to make sure you might be ramping up to 2025, 26. So is that kind of in your thought process kind of a good trade? Would you recommend that trade based on the chart, or did you have something else in mind?
So one of the things that I was thinking, I do like that trade, honestly. As far as the 2025 pick, I'm okay with that. What I was looking at though, I looked at a couple of wide receivers and tight ends that were in that same range as what Brian Robinson was in, and so some of the wide receivers that we're looking at is like Marquise Brown, Gabe Davis, Marvin Mims. Especially Marvin Mims or Gabe Davis. If you can find that guy that's still the Gabe Davis truther in your team, if he has Brian Robinson, I mean, that's just that the odds of that happening are slim, but hey, you never know. That might be just the perfect thing to put you over the top right there. And then As far as like tight ends, Jake Ferguson, Pat Freiermuth, I think that either one of those would be a decent give for Brian Robinson. As far as the package goes, though, I kind of really liked. I went down a little ways and I found the range of like OBJ, Odell Beckham, Gus Edwards, Trey Lance, Tyler Higbee, and I packaged them with a late second or an early third. So looking down a little bit further, these are all 2024's picks that I'm talking about here for the most part. Not looking too far into the 2025. I tried to make it so that we're only giving away picks that were this year, because most likely you're gonna have to pay for the next year's draft. So I'm trying to help the people out, save some money while making these trades. You know what I mean? but yeah, no, I really do like the especially like Odell Beckham Jr., Gus Edwards. I think either like with Gus Edwards, it's going to be an upgrade going to Brian Robinson, I think. And getting that if you can, especially if you have a late second, I think that would be enough. What's the word I'm looking for? Enough juice to really convince the other person to get into the trade, because you throw that second out there and people are like, ooh, second round pick. It's early enough in the draft that maybe that something will come out of that. Second round picks are becoming a hot commodity. So I really like that package deal right there.
Yeah, I think the other aspect of this too is if you are looking at trading future picks, if you're a stud team, right, you do run a little risk. Like you just hit a couple injuries next year, and that 2020, that projected 1.12 pick could be 1.7 in 2025. So you have to be a little wary of trading future assets, of course, because of that. Now, the Robinson thing, my assumption here, if I'm a win now team, I'm not trading away Brian Robinson. I think if I was a team that I thought wasn't going to win, that I would. The other thing about this trade chart and our discussion today is it's okay to be proactive. One of the things I noticed in Dynasty is that like you'll have tanking teams. Like you get halfway through the season and maybe a quarter of the teams don't want to win anymore, and so there's some leagues where they try to stop that. And by the way, every Dynasty league should prevent tanking. Honestly, I'm in a Dynasty league where 4 of the teams by like week 10 are not even starting good players. And it's like, it's stupid. That's the one downside of Dynasty. It's like, you got a couple teams, like 7 or 8 teams fighting for a playoff spot and positioning. And then you have these 4 teams that are tanking it. And based on the rules, there's no incentive to win. So I get that. So it's not their fault. They're just taking advantage of the rules. But I think every league should change the rules to incentivize either some form of winning, or in some leagues, you basically do max points for, like on Sleeper, where no matter what you do, if you bench the best players, it doesn't matter. They're gonna automatically populate your best team anyway. So I think that's a good way to do it. But the reason why I'm saying all this is because if you notice there's a window. So like if you're a bad team, right, and you're a bottom 4 team, and you know that there's probably 4 other teams in the league that are also in the tanking mode, there's a window to also say, you know what? Maybe I could compile some of the best players of these bottom feeding teams, and I could become a contender this year. Because if I know, like last year let's say I finished the 3rd worst league. I have a 1.03, right? I have that pick. But then I can go out and spend my early second, my early third. I can go trade future picks, or I could trade some, I could trade some of these other assets I have. And then I could go to another bad team and say, hey, I'll take your RB2 and I'll start building my team up to the middle. And then you get that 1.03 on top of it. You can easily sneak into the back into the playoffs, and then anything can happen. I literally had a Dynasty league this year. I was the 6th seed. My team was not the best team in the league. Wasn't even close to the best team in the league. And I just caught all the right breaks. A little Amari Cooper magic, next thing you know, you're in the title, then I won it. So like, I'm just saying there is other ways to do this. Just, you don't have to necessarily be a win now team to acquire some of these assets. Take advantage of the fact that there's other tanking teams in your league to try to compile some assets. You might be able to get good values. There's tanking teams who are just like, oh, I'll give you better value using this trade chart. For example, you could probably trade 2.03 and probably get a better player than you would get at 2.03, because that team is in tank mode. They're like, oh, give me the pick. I don't care about the player I have. Like, the 5th, 6th year receiver, or the 2nd or 3rd year running back that maybe isn't a stud necessarily, like a Brian Robinson type player. So these are just ideas, of way concepts to kind of do that. So is there kind of like, when you made your trade this off season, were you doing it from a win now position, or were you doing it more from a, you were kind of a rebuilding team?
It varied. There's a couple of different ones that I did with the trade chart so far. One of them I'm rebuilding. The one that I just did today is a rebuilding one. I traded away Brock Purdy and Dalton Schultz for Trey McBride and the 110.
Woo!
Yeah, in a super flex league tight end premium.
Yeah.
Which actually brings me to the fact that I should have said this before, the trade chart here that we're working with is super flex based. So that's where those values and everything for the quarterbacks is based off of that super flex idea. So just wanted to throw that out there. But yeah, no, so really excited about that one. Trey McBride for the future, I think, is going to be great. And I'm thinking about trying to turn my 110 and the 104 that I already had, try to move up to the 101 and get Caleb Evans. It's my hope.
Caleb Williams?
Caleb Williams. Yeah, Caleb Williams.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's
Caleb
cool.
Williams.
Like, yeah. So that's great. So one of the guys I want to talk about next is Chris Godwin. And so Godwin's coming off a down year. But the reason why I'm targeting him is that, first off, the Mike Evans stuff, we're not 100% sure yet if he stays or goes. But one of the key things about the coaching change to Liam Cohen this offseason was that the first thing he said was we're moving Chris Godwin back to the slot. One of the things that really hurt Chris Godwin this year is that he had to play on the outside a lot. And that's not where his strengths are. And so I think Cohen moving him back to the slot just means that, like, hey, by the way, Cohen, I know everyone thinks of him as the Kentucky OC that came over, he was a Rams guy. This guy was under Cliff Kingsbury, under Sean McVay for literally 5 seasons almost. And where do you think about Cooper Kupp? Like, Cooper Kupp dominated in that slot role. So I think that Chris Godwin is going to be a kind of a bounce back. So I think if you are someone that's kind of, floating in that middle range, or if you're just trying to acquire a second flex player, I like Chris Godwin. So talk to me a little bit about the trade that you're thinking about here to acquire Chris Godwin.
Sure. So again, looking at the trade chart, Godwin was valued at 40 points, which puts him at around a late first. Which if you're competing right now, that's probably what you have is the late round first. There's a couple different trades that I was looking at. Again, looking at most likely if you're trying to target a wide receiver, you're usually sitting pretty good at running at one of the other positions. So running back, you'd be looking at trading away like Tony Pollard, Javonte Williams, Isaiah Pacheco, which I think would be a great sell in this case for Godwin. Tight ends, you'd be looking at like Mark Andrews or Dalton Kincaid. I'm going to be honest, I'd probably hold on to Kincaid, but Mark Andrews, he's getting up there. You don't know what you got, and if you have a decent tight end room, he would be a good sell now to try to get Godwin, I think. But looking at the package deals, went down a little bit further. I got 2 package deals actually with this one. The one is based off of a mid-second, going with somebody like Tyler Lockett, Jalen Hyatt, or Rashad Bateman. If somebody hasn't given up on Rashad Bateman yet, I think that would be a solid throwing in that second. I think that you could find the right person to make that trade. And then looking at mid-third, you'd be looking at Keenan Allen, Deontay Johnson, or Terry McLaurin. Which again, I think that you can find somebody that is still high on like Keenan Allen, or actually on all 3 of those guys, that would be willing to make that trade just to get that third maybe.
So one of the things I like to really do, and this is kind of my mindset, is like I do want to try to put myself in another team's shoes. If like I know I'm like that, I think this is a perfect example. That 2.07 pick that I just highlighted on the screen. That pick is interesting because that's like you probably just made it into the playoffs. You might have, that 2.07, if that's actually your pick, you're basically a fringe playoff team. You might have just made the playoffs or just missed it based on, how many teams are in the league and how many teams make the playoffs. And like, if I feel like Chris Godwin in this new role is someone I like to buy, I do think that you're probably looking at a team in that scenario that's probably more rebuilding. So if you trade the pick, a guy like Hyatt is interesting. The one guy that really another guy that's on here that's really just Quinton Johnson, a little bit further down. Now, Johnson, former first round pick, Now we know Mike Williams' situation, Keenan Allen, they could be traded. We don't know yet, but I mean, released or traded by Jim Harbaugh's staff. But Quinton Johnson had a down season, but he was a first round pick. We're not 100% sure. Like packaging that pick and a guy like, Bateman's a good name too, but there's a lot going on because Zay Flowers has got the big shine now on him. But I think Quinton Johnston for that and that 2.07 to get a guy like Chris Godwin. But by the way, the irony is there's another player you have on there that we're going to talk about in a little bit, Ramondre Stevenson too. But that actually is interesting. What do you think about the Quinton Johnston and the 2.07, that middle second to get yourself Chris Godwin?
I love it actually, just because of the so I like to talk a lot about, or I talk a lot about go with what you know, not so much what you suppose, right? And we know Chris Godwin is good. We know that he's a top end player. There's a lot of hope that Quinton Johnson will be one of those top end players for the Chargers in the end of things. Maybe he can develop into one. And I'm hoping so. Just, you're never rooting against a guy, but at the same time, there's a lot of concern there, and we don't know what's going to happen with Quinton Johnson. He really didn't look good his first season. And so I'm more than willing to if I have Quinton Johnson and that 207, like you're saying, or that mid second round pick, yeah, I would make that trade in a heartbeat to try to get Chris Godwin, try to get what I know is good.
Yeah, and I think in this scenario too, like, and listen, I do think that, if you're definitely someone that's probably on the cusp of taking the next step in fantasy football, I do think that you should poke around. And obviously, I think that based on the trade, that's a fair trade. Like 2.07 and also Quinton Johnson to get yourself Chris Godwin's a fair trade. But I don't mind poking around a little bit to see, like, of course you there's a little gamesmanship here. You could always offer the third rounder with Quinton Johnson. You don't know how high a person is on Quinton Johnson still. Justin Herbert, Jim Harbaugh, all those things. So, don't offer the fair trade first. Obviously, I offer in good faith. I'm not saying you offer a bad trade just to get the juices flowing. You want to offer a decent trade first, but like say, hey, offer the trade based on Quinton Johnson. Be like, hey, I got Quinton Johnson. And by the way, do whatever you can to get your league mates numbers. Don't do this. I'm telling you, it'll save you time trying to go through the chats. People don't check those in the off season. Even if you don't really know everybody too well, try to get everybody's number. Because shoot guy a text, like, hey man, I got Quinton Johnson. I'm looking to upgrade to Chris Godwin. What would it take to add? Do you even have any interest in Quinton Johnson? Like, start the trade that way and see what their feeling is. They might tell you no. So I just a little tidbit there. I shift down to number 2 here. And we're going to get some running back players as well. And I want to talk quickly about, before we do that, I want to talk. The reason why I want to talk about Metcalf is that, JSN is going to get all the accolades right now. He's the young receiver. He's the new hotness. Now, there's a couple things. Number one, they moved to this rank. I've done some research on him, and I'm not a big college football guy. It is what it is. I am what I am. It is what it is. But for what I learned about this guy, especially at Washington, ton. College football last year in passing attempts and passing yards for their top quarterback. And so the one thing that's big difference between Shane Waldron, who the former OC is, and Pete Carroll to this new coaching staff is, like, if they do infuse pass volume, it'd be huge for whether it's a rookie quarterback, even Geno Smith. I think JSN obviously is probably the preferred player. Lockett leaves and he moves into a more permanent role. He's going to be a stud. But my question for you is, like, what is the package for a guy like if I want to try to get DK? So even if you're a middle of the pack team, like what's the player you're looking to target here?
Sure. And just a heads up, I don't know if it's me that's breaking up or if it's you, but I'm having a hard time hearing you from time to time. Just a heads up, just so you know. But
okay, it's probably
as far as what I'm looking at. So he's a mid to late first DK Metcalf is. He's on the trade chart because he's a value at 46. As far as what I'm looking at for trading him wise, I was looking at some running backs, tight ends, and some wide receivers, looking at doing like a 1-for-1 that I'd be interested in doing, trying to get DK Metcalf. I think that you could. So the running backs that I was looking at in that range were like Rashad White, Javonte Williams again, Kenneth Walker maybe. I think I'd be willing to part with them for DK Metcalf. Kenneth Walker would be a little bit more difficult for me to part with, I'll be honest. But I was thinking that if I can get DK Metcalf right now for Kenneth Walker, I still think that I'd make that trade, just because I think DK Metcalf is going to bring more to the table in the long run than what Walker is going to. Looking at some of the tight ends, you're looking at Trey McBride and TJ Hawkinson. That one might be a little bit harder to swing, but if you can make it happen, I could see you making those trades. And then as far as the wide receivers go, there's a couple here that I actually really like. T. Higgins, now that he's been franchise tagged, now that they let him know that he's going to be franchise tagged, I should say. It hasn't actually happened yet, but since it's going to be happening, I think his value is a little bit lower than what DK Metcalf's is. Along with Devontae Adams and Mike Evans, I think that because those two are such studs, but they're older and a little bit past their prime, I think I'd much rather have DK Metcalf. Looking at the package, you'd be looking at somebody like Marquise Brown, Gabe Davis, Marvin Mims, or Romeo Doubs, plus a mid-second, moving down the list a little bit there.
I guess my question is, if you have DK Metcalf and you're kind of a middling team and you're probably leaning towards not making a serious run in 2024, and you're going to offer up DK, you get a middle second. Like, what is I guess Romeo Doubs is kind of interesting, especially after his playoff run he just had with the Packers as a package deal, as a younger get younger. But is there another kind of younger-ish receiver that you've thought of that could be a good package with a mid-second? Like, I think Marquise Brown is a good player, but his situation is very uncertain right now. And I also feel like he's not that young. I mean, I know he's younger than DK, but not that much. I think, is there like a younger receiver that you kind of have if you want to get 3 to 4 years younger at the receiver position, line yourself up for 2025 and 26. Is there a player with that mid-second that you really had in mind, like Romeo Doubs?
Like Romeo Doubs. So Marvin Mims was one of them that I really like, and I think that you could make that push with Marvin Mims just because of the fact that he is. You don't really know what's going to be happening with in Denver, but there's a lot of hope that he's going to be the guy that he'll step up, make a big step this next year. Another one, just looking at the chart here really quick. So you're looking at like Jameson Williams. If you're out on Jameson Williams after the last couple of years of him not really doing too much, you might be able to pitch. Actually, that might be the best one right there. Jameson Williams with that mid-second, I think would get the deal done. Mm-hmm. And there's still a lot of hope that because it would get the deal done because of the fact that there is still a lot of hope that Jameson Williams will become what everybody hoped he was going to be when he was drafted in the first round, myself included.
Yeah, I like that because you have Jameson Williams rated as a 28. So in theory, to get yourself to that 46 range where DK Metcalf is, you're looking at a 2024 like 2.09-ish player, So if I'm a win-ish now team, 2.09 is probably realistic. 2.08 range, that 2.07 area, etc., is probably realistic with Jameson Williams. I like that trade a lot because, listen, Williams is a nice player, and he could, in theory, in 2 to 3 years, really take a former first-round pick. And by the way, guys coming off a serious ACL injury out of college, it's going to take him time anyway. And I do think we started seeing some glimpses down the stretch with Jared Goff and the Lions. All right. We're not going to go through everybody because we're already at the 29-minute mark, and Richard's a busy man. Listen, you know what? You know how hard it is to get Richard on a podcast? And I'm going to ask him to be on it for an hour. No, we're going to do one more trade, but I just want to talk quickly about some guys that I'm kind of liking as a target. First one's Cole Kmet. Obviously, we talked about Shane Waldron. 2 years ago in 2022, the Seahawks basically put together one of the very interesting. They used a bunch of 2 tight end sets. So I also love the fact that Caleb Williams will most likely be his quarterback. And I like Justin Fields, but Justin Fields is more of a dynamic running and passing quarterback. I just think having more of a traditional style quarterback in a Caleb Williams, I think is going to benefit that passing offense plus the offense coming in. I love Cole Kmet. Brian Robinson, we already touched on a little bit too. Ramondre Stevenson's another guy. Alex Van Pelt is coming in. We talked about Nick Chubb. Now, Nick Chubb, for years under Alex Van Pelt and the Browns, they used him as an absolute workhorse. He averaged well over, his 17-game pace was over, I just wrote it in the article I wrote in my top 150, like 316 opportunities, targets, and carries every single year. Ramondre is also a similar guy. By the way, we just kind of broke down Chris Godwin. Stevenson's very close in the trade chart, so you can kind of gauge similarly there as well. But I want to do one player that's kind of more of a, maybe it's a, deeper name guy that you could probably get on the cheap is Michael Mayer. Obviously, Luke Getsy coming over. We just saw what he did with Cole Kmet. And so Cole Kmet had top 10 seasons. Michael Mayer kind of showed a little bit towards this latter half. Now, the team still needs to figure out their quarterback situation. Now, I do feel that if you're in a kind of like you just a little upgrade at the position, but maybe not necessarily a win now team, but you're just kind of looking for maybe a high upside guy that maybe you can get on the cheap. I've thought of Michael Mayer based on that coaching change. What's your thoughts here? What did you come up with, Richard?
Sure. So looking at him, he's on the trade chart, he's valued at 24 points. So he's about a mid 2024 second. As far as the trade chart, there's one package deal in particular that I really, really liked. And I was looking at I was looking at Noah Fant and an early third. I think that there's a lot of hope around Noah Fant moving forward. And I think that you could get that deal done. And I think that Michael Mayer, in the end of things, it's a tough one. I really love Noah Fant. So for me, this would be a really hard trade to make. Yeah. But at the same time, I think that upside of what Michael Mayer brings would be worth it at the same time. So Michael Mayer or Noah Fant in that early third, late second.
Yeah, that late second, early. So I think it really comes. I don't think Michael Mayer, based on the information we have today, if I'm a win now team, I'm not targeting Michael Mayer. It was more like I like Luke Getsy coming in. They are talking maybe Justin, which by the way, if they get Justin Fields, I don't understand. Luke Getsy didn't know how to use Justin Fields, and you're going to bring in Justin Fields Raiders. Don't do that. Just leave Justin Fields alone. I don't want to deal with that. Just from a fantasy perspective. But anyway. But I was thinking this more as like Michael Mayer was like a hot commodity, but then Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid went off. But Michael Mayer was on par with those guys. And I think you started seeing a little glimpses down the stretch last year, even with that kind of weird offense they were running. It was like they ran the football and threw the ball to Devontae Adams, which, by the way, is not a bad idea. I'm not saying that's a bad idea for the Raiders. But if they do figure out their quarterback situation, they bring in someone more stable, I do think that the offense with Luke Getsy will help. So, if I was like, I think an early third round pick, like if I'm like one of those rebuilding teams and I feel like I can get a guy last year who was probably going in the second, might be a little bit less. I think if I have like a mid to early third round pick, this is a kind of player that I'll just poke around, just say, hey, obviously they might give up on him and I might get a starting caliber tight end for the next half decade or so if I make that deal. So that's kind of my thoughts behind Michael Mayer. I don't think it's a win now move. I would prefer a guy like Cole Kmet in that scenario if you're trying to beef up that tight end position as well. All right, Derek. Sorry, Richard. Before we close out the show, any final thoughts about the Dynasty Trade Chart? I know you have an update coming shortly. Tell the people when that's expected and what other content you have on other sites as well.
Sure. So I have an update coming out in the next couple days here. Just got to get it printed out there. It's going to be talking about the coaching changes and things like that, and what values have changed on the trade chart because of those coaching changes. As far as where you can find me in Razzball. You can find me on Twitter at GingerBeardMan, where the A is a 3. GingerBeardMan on Twitter.
And listen, I got to apologize on camera because I was like, hey, at Richard Sickels on Twitter. That's not even what it's at Gingerman. I totally forgot about that. Gingerman 3. That's my fault. I'm going to step up right now and man up and say, I apologize, Richard. That's my fault, but I love it. Appreciate you being on the show today. By the way, we're going to make this normal thing. We're going to be on here throughout the offseason. We have plenty of updates with NFL free agency, the NFL draft, so stay with us. We're going to constantly be updating that Dynasty Trade Chart. And by the way, just follow him on Twitter. Whenever there's news breaking, Richard's constantly talking about, and even when he doesn't talk about, I poke Richard. Go, hey, Richard, what do you think about this? Tell us what the Dynasty Trade Chart says. So I'll annoy him to make sure he's talking about it. But if you ever have Dynasty Trades, go to football.razzball.com. Check it out. We appreciate you for subscribing to the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. Jump over to IG and TikTok and go check out all the great articles you need to win your fantasy league. Thank you, Richard, once again for joining the show. And make sure you go follow me. I'm okay at Bobby LaMarco on Twitter. Whoa, we are out of here. Of course, I am not on the brand side, and this is how you don't close a show.